The avoidant person carries deep, persistent shame about how they treated you during the relationship and about the specific ways their patterns hurt someone who was offering them understanding, patience, and genuine care. And this shame is not abstract guilt about the relationship not working out, but is concrete, specific shame about identifiable behaviors and moments where they recognized they treated you poorly, where they responded to your vulnerability with coldness, where they punished your emotional honesty with withdrawal, where they took your patience for granted and your understanding as permission to continue patterns that damaged you, where they made you feel like your needs were too much when your needs were actually entirely reasonable and their capacity was too small. The avoidance shame is rooted in the growing recognition that you didn't deserve the treatment you received, that you were genuinely trying to love them and to build something meaningful while they were defending against exactly what you were offering, that you showed up consistently while they showed up sporadically, that you were emotionally available while they were emotionally withholding, that you maintained your dignity and your worth while they employed manipulation and control tactics that they now recognize were harmful and selfish. This shame intensifies as time passes and as they gain distance and perspective on the relationship, as they compare how you treated them versus how they treated you and recognize the profound asymmetry, as they attempt to connect with others and realize that what you offered was rare and that how they responded to your offerings was destructive, as they sit with the reality that they hurt someone who was genuinely good to them, someone who saw their wounds and responded with compassion rather than with judgment, someone who deserved far better than the inconsistency and the emotional unavailability and the defensive patterns they provided. The shame is complicated by the recognition that they knew better. Even while they were doing it, they weren't completely unaware of their patterns. While the relationship was happening, they knew on some level that they were being hot and cold. They recognized they were withdrawing when you needed presence. They understood they were taking you for granted, but their defensive system and their fear was stronger than their awareness. Their need for self-protection overrode their capacity to treat you well. Their patterns won over their genuine care for you. Now, in retrospect, with clarity that presence prevented, they see more fully what they did, and they carry shame that is both an appropriate response to having hurt someone and also a burden that weighs on them constantly, that affects their self-image, that creates discomfort. They cannot escape through their usual defensive strategies because the shame is about the defensive strategies themselves. The specific behaviors and patterns they now carry shame about. The avoidant person's shame is not vague or general, but is tied to specific behaviors and patterns they now recognize as harmful, as unjust, as poor treatment of someone who deserved far better. Understanding these specific shame sources reveals what they recognize they did wrong and what haunts them in retrospect. They carry shame about their hot and cold behavior that kept you in a constant state of uncertainty and anxiety. Recognizing now that this inconsistency was cruel, regardless of whether it was intentional, the avoidant remembers the pattern clearly now. Being warm and engaged and present, making you feel secure and valued, then suddenly becoming cold and distant and unavailable without explanation or warning, leaving you confused and anxious about what changed or what you did wrong. They recognize now that this pattern was torture for you, that the inconsistency created anxiety and insecurity, that you never knew which version of them you'd encounter, or whether the warmth would last or would suddenly disappear. The shame comes from understanding that their hot and cold behavior wasn't about you doing anything wrong, but was about their own patterns, and that you suffered the consequences of their inability to maintain consistent emotional temperature without deserving that suffering. They carry shame about how they responded to your vulnerability with withdrawal or coldness, recognizing they punished the very openness that intimacy requires. The avoidant remembers specific moments when you were vulnerable with them, when you shared something painful from your past, when you expressed feelings about them or about the relationship, when you showed them your fears or your needs. And they remember their response was to create distance, to become cold, to withdraw physically or emotionally. They recognize now that you were trusting them with your vulnerable self, and they responded by making vulnerability unsafe, by teaching you that opening up led to abandonment, by punishing your emotional honesty. The shame comes from understanding that they damaged your capacity to be vulnerable by responding to vulnerability with rejection, and that this damage was a consequence of their own fear rather than any failing on your part. They carry shame about taking your patience and understanding for granted, treating your extraordinary tolerance of their patterns as an unlimited resource they could exploit without consequence. The avoidant recognizes now that your patience with their withdrawal, your understanding of their patterns, your willingness to give chances was not weakness or dependency, but was tremendous strength and generosity, and they exploited this. They took your patience as permission to continue patterns without changing. They used your understanding as an excuse to not work on themselves. They treated your tolerance as if it was infinite, as if they could continue their behavior indefinitely and you'd always be there. The shame comes from recognizing that what you offered was a gift that they used selfishly, that they took advantage of your care rather than honoring it with changed behavior or with genuine effort to be better. They carry shame about making you feel like your needs were too much, when your needs were normal relationship needs, and their capacity was inadequate. The avoidant remembers telling you explicitly or implicitly that you were too needy, too demanding, too emotional, that you wanted too much. They made you question yourself, made you try to suppress or minimize your needs, made you feel like you were the problem. They recognize now that your needs were completely reasonable. You needed consistency. You needed emotional presence. You needed reassurance. You needed to feel prioritized, and that these are normal needs that any healthy relationship should meet. The shame comes from understanding that they made you feel defective for having normal needs, when the actual problem was their inability to meet needs that they should have been able to meet. That they damaged your sense of what you deserve by framing their inadequacy as your excessive demands. They carry shame about specific moments of cruelty or dismissiveness that they can replay in their minds, moments where they were unnecessarily harsh or cold in ways that hurt you deeply. The avoidant has specific memories that haunt them. Times they said something cutting or dismissive, times they were cold when you were reaching for connection, times they ignored you when you needed acknowledgement, times they were cruel in ways that went beyond their usual withdrawal patterns. These specific moments stand out as clear failures of basic human decency, moments where they chose to hurt rather than to be neutral or distant, moments where they see now that they inflicted unnecessary pain. The shame about these specific moments is acute because there's no way to reframe them or justify them. They were simply mean, simply hurtful, simply inexcusable. They carry shame about breadcrumbing you or keeping you as a backup option while they explored other possibilities or maintained their defended independence. The avoidant recognizes now that they treated you as an option rather than as a priority, that they kept you somewhat available without committing to you, that they breadcrumbed with minimal contact to maintain your interest without providing an actual relationship. They understand now that this treatment was disrespectful and selfish, that you deserve to be chosen clearly or released completely, that keeping you as backup while not fully choosing you was using you in ways that served them while hurting you. The shame comes from recognizing they treated someone valuable as a dispensable option, that they prioritized their comfort and their control over your dignity and your right to be with someone who chose you clearly. They carry shame about gaslighting you about their patterns, making you doubt your accurate perceptions and your legitimate responses to their behavior. The avoidant remembers telling you that you were overthinking, that you were too sensitive, that you were seeing problems that weren't there, that your reactions to their inconsistency were overreactions. They recognize now that you were reading the situation accurately, that your perceptions were correct, that your responses to their behavior were reasonable. The shame comes from understanding that they made you doubt your reality because acknowledging your accurate perceptions would have required them to take responsibility for their patterns, that they sacrificed your trust in your own perceptions to protect their defense against accountability. They carry shame about the cumulative weight of their patterns, recognizing that even if individual behaviors might be explained or minimized, the overall pattern of treatment was damaging and was below what you deserved. The avoidant might be able to explain any single behavior. This withdrawal was because they needed space. This cold moment was because they were overwhelmed. This dismissiveness was because they were in a bad mood. But looking at the overall pattern, looking at the cumulative effect of month after month or year after year of inconsistency and emotional unavailability and defensive behaviors, they recognize that regardless of explanations for individual moments, the overall pattern of how they treated you was inadequate and harmful. The shame comes from recognizing that you deserved sustained good treatment and they provided sustained inadequate treatment, and that the cumulative damage of their patterns is what really hurt you rather than any single moment. Why the shame intensifies over time rather than fading. The avoidant person's shame about how they treated you doesn't fade with time and distance as shame about many past behaviors might, but instead intensifies and deepens as time passes. Understanding why the shame grows rather than diminishes reveals both the nature of their recognition and the lasting impact of their treatment of you on their psychological landscape. The shame intensifies over time because distance and perspective allow them to see their behavior more clearly without the distortion of their active defensive system. While they were in the relationship, while they were actively employing their defensive patterns, their defensive system created distortions that protected them from fully seeing or feeling the impact of their behavior. They minimized, justified, blamed, reframed. But with time and distance, with the relationship ended, and the immediate defensive needs no longer active, they can see more clearly. They can recognize patterns they couldn't see while defending against intimacy. They can acknowledge impact they minimized while protecting themselves. This clearer vision means they see more fully how they treated you. And seeing more clearly means feeling more shame about what they now recognize they did. The shame intensifies over time because they compare how you treated them versus how they treated you, and the asymmetry becomes more apparent and more painful. During the relationship, the avoidant might not have fully registered the imbalance. You were giving so much more, trying so much harder, being so much more consistent. But in retrospect, the comparison is stark and undeniable. You showed up and they disappeared. You were patient and they were demanding. You were understanding and they were critical. You maintained your care for them while they withheld care from you. This growing recognition of the profound asymmetry, where you gave far more than you received, creates intensifying shame because it proves they were taking from you without adequately giving back, that they were in a relationship characterized by your generosity and their selfishness. The shame intensifies over time because they attempt connections with others and realize through comparison that what you offered was rare and exceptional, making their poor treatment of an exceptional person feel more shameful. When the avoidant dates or connects with others after you, they discover that other people don't offer what you offered. Others don't see them as deeply. Others don't accept their patterns as readily. Others don't create the same safety or understanding. This recognition that you were special, that what you provided was rare, makes the shame about how they treated you more intense, because it means they didn't just treat an ordinary partner poorly. They treated someone exceptional poorly. They destroyed something rare. They failed to appreciate someone who should have been treasured. The shame intensifies as they recognize the specific value of what they lost and how poorly they treated something so valuable. The shame intensifies over time because they recognize that you were genuinely trying to love them while they were defending against love, creating profound regret about rejecting what they actually needed. The avoidant understands in retrospect that you weren't trying to trap them or control them or overwhelm them. You were trying to love them, to connect with them, to build something meaningful with them. And their response to your genuine attempts at love was to defend against them, to withdraw from them, to make love unsafe and unwelcome. This recognition that they pushed away the very thing they needed, that they defended against a person who was offering them what their wounded heart actually needed, creates intensifying shame because it proves their defensive system betrayed them, caused them to destroy exactly what could have healed them. The shame intensifies over time because they sit with the reality that they hurt someone who didn't deserve to be hurt, someone who was innocent in the sense of genuinely trying to be a good partner. The avoidant might be able to minimize shame about hurting someone who hurt them first, or who was manipulative, or who deserved poor treatment in some way, but you didn't deserve it. You were genuinely trying. You were patient and understanding. You were offering them care and acceptance. The innocence of your intentions and the genuineness of your efforts make the shame more intense because there's no way to justify or minimize their treatment of you. You didn't provoke it. You didn't deserve it. You were simply trying to love someone who responded to your love with patterns that hurt you. This recognition of your innocence and their culpability intensifies shame over time. The shame intensifies over time because they cannot undo what they did, cannot go back and treat you better, leaving them with a permanent record of failure they cannot correct. If the avoidant could go back and handle things differently, could treat you the way you deserved, the shame might be more manageable because it could be corrected, but they can't. What's done is done. The way they treated you is a permanent reality that cannot be changed. You carry the impact of their treatment. They carry the shame of having treated you that way. The permanence, the impossibility of correction makes the shame more intense over time because there's no relief through making amends or through doing better. There's only sitting with the unchangeable reality of having hurt someone who deserved better. The shame intensifies over time because they recognize that any apology or attempt at amends is more about relieving their shame than about serving your healing, adding another layer of selfishness to their shame. The avoidant might want to apologize, might want to express regret, might want to make amends, but they recognize that this desire is primarily about them, about relieving their guilt, about feeling less shame, about hearing that you forgive them so they can feel better. This recognition that even their desire to apologize is somewhat selfish, that it's more about managing their shame than about serving you, adds another layer to the shame. They're ashamed of how they treated you. And they're ashamed that even their response to that shame is self-focused, proving the selfishness that characterized their treatment of you is still present in how they think about making amends. The shame intensifies over time because they're forced to integrate this experience into their self-understanding, to see themselves as a person capable of treating someone badly, challenging their self-image in ways that create ongoing discomfort. The avoidant might have had a self-image as a decent person, as a person who doesn't hurt others, as a person with good intentions. But their treatment of you challenges this self-image. They have to integrate that they are a person who hurt someone who didn't deserve it, a person whose patterns cause genuine harm, a person capable of selfishness and emotional cruelty. This integration of a less flattering self-understanding creates lasting shame that doesn't fade because it's not just about what they did, but about what their actions reveal about who they are. And changing self-perception is more lasting and more painful than regretting specific actions. How their shame manifests in ways they cannot fully hide. The avoidant person's shame about how they treated you, while an internal experience they might prefer to keep hidden, manifests in observable ways that reveal the depth and the persistence of their regret. Understanding these manifestations shows how their shame affects their behavior and their life, even when they're trying to hide it. Their shame manifests in how they talk about you to others, with reverence or regret that's uncharacteristic for how they typically discuss ex-partners. The avoidant might mention you to friends or to new partners in ways that reveal their shame. They speak highly of you. They acknowledge they treated you poorly. They express regret in ways that are unusual for them. Where they might be dismissive or critical of other ex-partners, with you they're respectful, even admiring. They might say things like, "I really messed that up. They deserve so much better than how I treated them. I wasn't ready for someone that good." This different tone, this acknowledgement of their failure and your value, reveals the shame they carry because talking about you requires acknowledging their role in the relationship's failure in ways they can't avoid or minimize. Their shame manifests in their inability to speak badly about you, even when others might criticize you, or when it would serve their narrative to blame you. Even in contexts where the avoidant might benefit from blaming you, from making the relationship's failure your fault, from criticizing your behavior, they cannot do it. When mutual friends mention you, when new partners ask about you, when contexts arise where criticism of you would be easy or convenient, they defend you or they speak neutrally, unable to add to a narrative that you were the problem. This inability to speak badly about you reveals their shame because criticizing you would require dishonesty that their shame won't allow. They know you weren't the problem, they were, and their shame prevents them from distorting this reality, even when doing so would serve them. Their shame manifests in their reaction when they encounter information about you, showing a visible emotional response that reveals you still affect them profoundly. When the avoidant sees your social media, when they hear about you from mutual friends, when they encounter you in person, there's a visible reaction. Discomfort, sadness, longing, visible shame. They might look away, might become quiet, might show tension in their body language. These reactions reveal that thinking about you, being reminded of you, creates an emotional response they cannot completely suppress. The strength of the reaction is proportional to the shame they feel. The more ashamed they are of how they treated you, the more uncomfortable they are with reminders of you, because those reminders activate the shame. Their shame manifests in their monitoring of your life from a distance, checking on you through social media or through mutual friends in ways that reveal an ongoing preoccupation. The avoidant looks at your social media regularly, even though they're not engaging with your content. They ask casual questions to mutual friends about how you're doing. They keep tabs on your life from a distance. This monitoring reveals their shame because they're checking to see if you're okay. They're seeing if you've moved on. They're gathering information that either eases or intensifies their guilt based on whether you seem happy or seem to be struggling. The monitoring is an attempt to manage their shame through information about your current state. Their shame manifests in their keeping mementos or not deleting photos or messages from you, maintaining tangible connections to a relationship they feel guilty about ending or damaging. The avoidant keeps photos of you in their phone, even if hidden in a folder. They keep messages you sent. They keep items you gave them, where they might delete or discard reminders of other relationships they're moving on from. With you, they maintain these connections. The keeping reveals shame because the items are both reminders of what they lost and also evidence of the connection they damaged, physical anchors for the guilt and regret they carry. They cannot get rid of these items because doing so would feel like compounding their poor treatment of you by erasing the evidence of your significance. Their shame manifests in their changed behavior in subsequent relationships, trying to do differently what they did wrong with you in ways that prove they learned from how they treated you. The avoidant might be more communicative with new partners, more consistent, more willing to discuss feelings, more careful not to withdraw as harshly. These behavioral changes reveal that they learned from the relationship with you, that they recognize their patterns hurt you, that they're trying not to repeat the same mistakes. While these changes come too late to benefit you, They reveal the shame they carry, because the changes are an implicit acknowledgement that how they treated you was wrong and needed to be different. The fact that they can do better with others while they couldn't do better with you might intensify their shame. Their shame manifests in their inability to accept comfort or absolution from others when they express regret about how they treated you, revealing the depth of their self-blame. When the avoidant expresses regret to friends and friends try to comfort them, it wasn't all your fault. You did your best. They weren't perfect either. They reject this comfort, insist on their culpability, refuse to be let off the hook. This rejection of comfort reveals how deeply they blame themselves, how much shame they carry, how unable they are to minimize or distribute responsibility away from themselves. They know they treated you poorly, and they won't accept narratives that minimize this reality, and their insistence on taking full responsibility reveals the shame is not surface-level regret, but is deep, consuming self-blame. Their shame manifests in their reactions to your happiness or success, showing genuine joy mixed with pain rather than jealousy or indifference. When the avoidant learns you're doing well, that you're happy, that you've achieved things or found a healthier relationship, their reaction is a complex mixture of genuine happiness for you and pain about their loss and their role in the ending. They're glad you're okay, and they're devastated that you're okay without them. This complex reaction reveals their shame because the genuine happiness for you proves they care about your well-being, while the pain proves they recognize they lost you through their own actions. If they didn't carry shame about how they treated you, they might be indifferent or purely jealous, but the mixture of happiness and pain reveals the complexity of their regret, what their shame means for you and your healing journey. The avoidant person's shame about how they treated you has specific implications for your understanding of what happened and for your own healing process. Understanding what their shame means helps you interpret their behavior accurately and helps you use this information in ways that serve your growth rather than keeping you stuck. Their shame means your perception that you were treated poorly is validated, that you weren't being too sensitive or too demanding, but were accurately identifying inadequate treatment. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant might have made you question your perceptions, might have suggested you were overreacting or being too critical, might have made you doubt whether your complaints about their treatment were legitimate. Their shame, their recognition that they treated you poorly, validates that your perceptions were accurate. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't asking for too much. You were correctly identifying that their treatment of you was inadequate and hurtful. This validation supports your healing by confirming your reality and by helping you trust your perceptions in future relationships rather than doubting yourself as you might have learned to do during the relationship with them. Their shame means the problems in the relationship were fundamentally about their limitations and their patterns, not about your inadequacy or your excessive needs. The avoidance shame confirms what you might have intellectually understood, but emotionally doubted. The problem wasn't you. You weren't unlovable. You weren't too much. You weren't fundamentally flawed. The problem was their capacity, their patterns, their defensive structure that prevented them from meeting normal relationship needs and from treating you with consistency and care. This confirmation protects your self-worth from being damaged by their rejection or by their poor treatment, helping you understand that their limitations are not a commentary on your value.